Hello, everybody, and welcome to another installment of our Southern California housing market update. My name is Stephen Meade. I'm your host with Domicile real estate for people who love houses. The week is just after Thanksgiving. Today is November 30th, 2021, and I'm actually we have kind of a funky update for you, and I'm really glad a couple things actually went in a way horrifically wrong in a very coincidental way, but it lets us prove an interesting point. I think a lot of people out there like to regurgitate information that they've seen about the housing market online. I think this is pretty common in the real estate space, and I actually don't think that there's anything terribly wrong with that. I think if you don't know how to calculate the stats yourself, use somebody else's data and kind of repeat what you've heard. But this week illustrates why it's important to understand how the methodology for collecting these things so that you can better interpret the results. And whenever we have a result, when we're running the numbers, so to speak, and the result is surprising, we always kind of try to take a look back at that methodology to see, is there something that we're missing that might explain why those numbers are moving in kind of an interesting way. And this week we have not one, but two occurrences. This past week was a holiday week. Not only was it a holiday week, but the day after the holiday is also traditionally a bit of a holiday in and of itself. And, that has really kind of played with some of the numbers. And I think someone who doesn't understand how these numbers were generated might come to completely wrong conclusions. So come with me as we take a journey in statistics and understanding context and basic understanding of methodologies and why that is important, especially when you're trying to get market information in real estate. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Here we are. So we're going to go back here. So we're going to start off here with something that I think is not really terribly affected by it being a holiday week, but I think is important to highlight. Look at these total active listings. Just as a reminder, this is Los Angeles and Orange counties. If you look here in our under 1 million category, we are now significantly below where we were at the start of the year, and we're not even into December yet. These numbers will continue to deteriorate as we head towards the end of the year. That's my prediction. I think it's pretty accurate. So if you look here, we were maybe right about 5,000 units of active under a million. And today, we are looking at, like 4,300 units. This is, again, basically, we are already 20% under where we were at the beginning of the year. If you don't see that as a coming storm of inventory crisis, in the spring, I don't know what to tell you. To me, I think that's a pretty solid conclusion at the standpoint in time. And what's crazy to me is if you look at this $1 to $2 million category, things aren't really that much better. I mean, we are here maybe like 2,400 units, and now we are below 2,000 again, about 20% under where we were at the beginning of the year. And I worry a little bit, how much worse is it going to get through the month of December? Because if we start January, the beginning of the year, and we're somewhere like around 1,500 units, just think of what a spring that is going to create for us if we don't have something that changes in the market that either alters demand drastically or conversely results in a lot of new listings hitting the market. Now, if we move on to 14-day new listings, this gives us a little bit of a window into something. And I want you, before you act completely alarmed by this, remember, this is over the last 14 days, so there's a little bit of smoothing on this. But how many people want to put their home on the market the week of Thanksgiving? If you're a seller, think about that. Is that something you want to do? Do you think that that's the best marketing opportunity for you? As you can see, you are not alone if you think that's a terrible idea. I actually don't think it would have been a terrible idea this year because of the limited inventory. I think you would have actually gotten attention from very serious buyers. But if you look here, I mean, just seeing this number of listings drop should really tell you something. At our peak, we had almost 4,000 new listings back in July, and the last 2 weeks, we only had 2,000 new listings under $1 million. Kind of a similar story here as far as our 1 to 2 million goes. That market took a pretty sharp decline. I do think that there's going to be some rebounding I don't think that these are really accurate permanent numbers. Obviously, the holiday week affects this tremendously. We should see a little bit less of an effect next week. And then, the following week, it will be completely out of the system. Because remember, we're trailing 2 weeks average to try to smooth this out. And if you look at our new escrows, they dropped as well, but there's a problem with this. I want you to look at what happened here and then look at what happened here. You might notice that one of these is a lot steeper and longer than the others. One of these dropped by a lot more. And, one of the things I think people try to oversimplify things sometimes, right? We think, well, if demand dropped, the market is cooling. But it's not demand dropping that really dictates that. It's the relationship between supply and demand that is the problem. And if you go here to our next slide, I think this really illustrates it perfectly. This is our absorption rate. This is how we reconcile supply of homes coming out of the market and the demand of homes being taken off the market because they went into escrow. And if you look at this figure, the last time we saw numbers this big, almost 130% in our 1 to 2 million, well, that was that week around Christmas time, right? So holiday weeks absolutely do wreak havoc with this measurement. I think what's scary to me though is I'm not necessarily sure we're going to see these numbers dive that much below 100%, right? Even if they go back to 100, that is still an incredibly competitive market. So even factoring in what we're going to call the turkey effect on these stats, I still think that we are in sort of a bit of a dire situation for buyers. Now, if you're a seller, this is great news, right? I mean, this means, especially if you've got a house that's attractive, there is a line of people out the door who will want to buy it. Okay, I want to preface this. You might have seen a sneak peek on that chart. I'm going to talk about what happened, and I'm going to tell you why it is important to understand the methodology when you calculate market stats. So give me a second here. All right. So if you look at this, these are closed prices, and it looks like they took a tumble. I mean, a huge tumble, right? We went from basically probably about 1.3 million down to, 1,075,000. We took a dive from 800 down to 750, pretty much across the board. Now, is this indicative of a market that has crashed 4 to 6 weeks ago? No, it is not, and I'm going to tell you why. So one of the things that happens when you're calculating medians, 25th percentiles and 75th percentiles is that you are subject to distortion as a result of sample size. And what is sample size? Well, in our case, it's how many homes closed. In order to keep our sample size reasonable, the way we measure this is we take a look backwards at the preceding week at all the homes that closed on the busiest closing days of the week. Do you know what the busiest closing days of the week are? They are Thursday and Friday. Now, let's look back to last week. What do we know about Thursday and Friday of last week? Well, Thursday was a holiday, so we had no closings at all. That's kind of a problem in and of itself. And Friday is a day that very few people want to close on. And in fact, in LA County, it is very disadvantageous to close last Friday. And the reason being is, in order to close last Friday in LA County, it means your loan had to fund on Wednesday, and you would have paid an extra day of interest. Nobody wanted to do that, so anybody in LA County pushed their closings to Monday. So the problem that we had is we had a very, very small sample size. And what I mean small sample size, I mean only a fraction of the normal number of listings that we would regularly have. And there's a couple reasons why this might have skewed things downward. Part of it is luck, but part of it is the types of people who did in fact close on Friday. It could also be that it was mainly measuring only Orange County data and not very much LA County data in that period of time. So that could have skewed these results. So, my point here is, if you took this information on the face of it, you would say we have a market that is plummeting, but I'm telling you that's not the case. It is an artifact or a distortion because of our methodology. And for that, I totally apologize to you. but I think it's important to really understand how these things are calculated so that you can better understand what's going on in the market. Okay, so that is kind of our second distortion. Our first being that absorption rate due to the holidays is a little bit foobarred, right? Because we just don't, this is just the patterns of buyers and sellers are just very different during a holiday week. Now we've got our percent still active after 14 days in the market. This statistic is a little bit more immune to kind of these timing fluctuations. And as you can see, that actually showed a market that got more competitive in the last 2 weeks. And you know what? I feel it. I absolutely feel it out there in the marketplace. So our anecdotal data is supporting our numerical data. If you look at our close to list ratio, it also is continuing to sort of hover around this 102% mark, 2.5% maybe. I don't expect that to change anytime soon. I think it might actually go up a little bit because we're just seeing so many market forces because of a lack of inventory. Our days on market is holding steady. That might not sound like news, but that is huge news because normally in the fall, that days on market will creep upwards. This is supposed to be a parabola shape that reaches a low point and goes back up, and it's not happening. And the reason it's not happening is because we are moving back into what is an extremely inventory constricted market. So there are no homes or very few homes that are sitting for extended periods of time to push these days on market averages up. Finally, we have our affordability chart. Now, one of the things you might notice is if our median housing price went down, as indicated by the red graph, how did our affordability deteriorate between last week and this week? Well, again, it comes down to methodology. For calculating our basic medians, we look back the previous 5 days of closings. We have a larger sample size. And guess what? That median price went upwards, which basically confirms our theory that our dropping prices on our previous graph are an artifact of the methodology and don't represent an accurate picture of what's actually happening. It is because of the way they are calculated. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this affordability. We did see it jump a bit, but this curve is tapering. We've had some numbers that were higher than this before, but this is a new high in terms of how expensive are the payments on a median priced home. I do think we should take note of that. I think we are in such an inventory constricted market. And if you draw a graph through here, right, if you drew a trend line, you'd see that the reality is that trend line is going up in what we'll consider maybe in an inflationary manner, maybe even a little bit more than inflationary, though apparently right now inflation is running about 6% a year. So that would mean over a 6-month period, we would have expected a 3% increase in that average. I think that's about what we're seeing. So, I think we're still within the margins of what we would expect in a normally functioning market. But, I'm going to tell you something. The market, I don't think, can take the stress of this extreme inventory shortage. And I think, there's a phrase that a lot of people are familiar with, which is something's got to give. And I think we're going to see that something having to give fairly shortly. I think we're going to either have to see interest rates go up or prices bump a little bit to cool demand. I don't know how effective that's going to be, because if prices go up to cool demand, that may actually might reduce the ability of people to move up on houses, which will further reduce listings, right? And we'll be right back to square one, fewer listings, which is indeed the problem. I have one final chart for you here, and that is our prevailing mortgage interest rates. And we have seen the bump. Our lows were down here. Our lows were down here in this kind of, high 2s range. They slowly went up to maybe about 3.25. They dropped down to 3, then they bumped back up, maybe a little less than 3.25 now. I'm not too worried about what I'm seeing on this front. Some people are even predicting that we're going to have a little bit of an economic backslide, which will lower interest rates further. I'm not sure about that. I'll see it when I see it. But we're still not in that danger zone. What's really going on here is that as a market, I think we're seeing this point where we're not in a steady equilibrium anymore. We have a huge shortage of listings. I think the spring is going to look very ugly for buyers and very favorable for sellers who don't have to buy something else. If you're a seller who does have to buy something else, well, it's just kind of, you know, you are the belle of the ball when you're selling your home, and you are a peasant on the street begging for change when you're buying, right? And that's just the reality of that kind of a market dynamic. Hopefully, we see some alleviation in either inventory, or we see possibly, if interest rates rise a little bit, that might actually alleviate some of that demand and help our market get back to more of a reasonable balance between buyers and sellers. But I don't see that happening in the next couple of months. I just don't. I think January, I think the buying boom in the spring is going to come earlier than it did in years past, even earlier than last year, where it kind of started towards that middle to end of January was our spring buying boom. I think we're going to see there's not going to be a let up. I think buyers are going to be right there beginning of January looking at houses. Anyhow, do not forget to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Questions, comments, we absolutely love them. Keep them coming. And finally, if you are looking to buy or sell a home in Southern California and you would like expert advice, we would love to work with you and offer our expertise. Definitely hit us up. We'd love to chat, and we'll see you again later this week.